Well, did we surprise you? I thought you said the only way to surprise you if Bernie doesn't play. So thank you very much to Bernie Marenbach, Klezmer Ensemble. For those people who don't know, Bernie, you're the greatest musician, how do you say it?
In the Middle East, including Pakistan.
Oh, good. But Bernie actually hails from Borough Park, and in fact, this is also part, not only is he a great musician, but there's a real feeling, a real family connection. Bernie's mother, Lila, Alea Shalom, and his father, Gershon Marenbach, were very, very important members of the Young Israel of Borough Park, and of course, they were very close with Avi's family. And so this was very important, and of course Lila and Claire were very, very close friends. So thank you very much for Bernie for beginning the evening on the right foot. And I'd like to, before we begin, first of all, my name is Danny Grossman, and I'll just call myself a friend of Matan. I think it's the best thing to do. I'm former Air Force, but I think that's, for all intents and purposes, I came here when I first discovered Matan. It's an amazing, amazing place. So it's a wonderful, wonderful place. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Rabbanit Malkabina, the founder and chancellor of Matan. And it is truly my privilege to call on our mayor, Zevik Bielski, who needs no introduction other than to say he is Ra'anana and Ra'anana is Zevik.
Toda rabba. Wow, only you can bring so many people here, and they're all... קודם כל, עברית או אנגלית? How come אנגלית? Okay, this is Ra'anana, okay. So, good evening everybody, and first of all, נהוג אצלנו, I'll say a few words in Hebrew. פותחים בכבוד האכסניה. How do you say it in English? You start with a place that you come to, and I want to say a few words about Matan and about Oshra. I've been introduced to Oshra years ago, and I asked her to be on my list. And today Oshra is a deputy of the chairman, where is the chairman of the Moatza Datit, Oshra, Mechiyot Kapayim, deputy chairman of the Moatza Datit. I don't think it will happen in Jerusalem, but in Ra'anana it happens. And when Oshra had this idea of Matan, it's exactly the DNA of Ra'anana. And when I came here, by the way, I will always also remember, I was the first Talmid. I was sitting here with Oshra, and she gave me shiur. I still remember the shiur. One day when we'll have time, I'll explain to you the shiur. It took me a little bit time to understand, but Oshra was a very good teacher. So, first one. And what Matan is doing is actually bring people together. That's what we need in Israel, to bring people together, to make women step forward, and to mix דתיים ולא דתיים, כאלה ואחרים. Everybody is welcome here. There is no limit. You don't say you are not belong. Everybody belongs here. And to have Matan in Ra'anana, it upgrade Ra'anana. Oshra, thank you very much for what you're doing, and all your supporters, everybody that support Matan, is the best thing that you did. And those that have got some ideas, this is the best thing that you can do to support Matan. So that's good. And I came especially to say a few words about a man that I thought, no, what can I say about Alan Dershowitz that wasn't said before? That he was, I think, the youngest professor in Harvard, that he stands for Israel everywhere, every time. Sometimes I say, what he's going to say now, and he's saying it. regardless, every corner, every stage in the world, Ellen is there to defend the state of Israel. Unfortunately, we haven't got too many friends, but a friend like you, number one. Thank you very much, Ellen. And the one last thing I can tell you about him that you don't know, now he comes to Israel, he comes to Ran. And by the way, you know, when people make Aliyah, they don't make Aliyah to Israel. They make Aliyah to Ra'anana, and it happens to be in Israel. But Ellen is actually Avi. So Avi, thank you very much for coming here. B'atzlacha rabba, and thanks for everything you do for the state of Israel. Toda rabba.
Toda rabba. And before I call on Rabbanit Oshra Koren, who is the First Lady of Matan, I wanted to also acknowledge one of the First Lady, my wife Lisa, who's here. She's actually, her office is here in Ra'anana, so I'm sure she's treated half of your kids. But it is just about a few weeks ago, or I guess about a month ago, when I first got an email from Avi's Aunt Shirley. She said, we're going to do something in Matan. It's a very important place to me, and gave me the number of Oshra. So I call up Oshra, come meet with her. I fell in love, not so much with Oshra, but with this whole concept, everything you're doing here. It's an amazing thing, so please give it up for Oshra Baksha.
So I want to welcome you all to Bet Matan, the Mindy Greenberg Women's Institute for Torah Studies. We are greatly honored to have you, Professor Alan Dershowitz, here with us tonight. The excitement is immense. All my staff has been all week dreaming of Alan Dershowitz coming. And I even got a call from the mayor's office, and the secretary of the mayor said, are you sure? Is it the Alan Dershowitz, the professor? How'd you get him to come? I said, thanks to Aunt Shirley. So I want to thank Aunt Shirley, who isn't here tonight, but you can tell your mother that we miss her here. And Alan, you have been called Israel's single most visible defender. And the late Elie Wiesel said, if there had been a few people like Alan Dershowitz in 1930s or 1940s, the history of European Jewry might have been different. I want to welcome our dear friend, Zev Bielski, mayor of Ra'anana, who really helped me immensely and still continues to help and will continue to help to support Matan here. Rabbanit Malka Bina, founder and chancellor of Matan, who really I owe everything and all my Torah to Malka, friends and students. The Gemara in Masechet Brachot says, one should only pray in a room that has windows. Rav Kook explains, although prayer is an internal function of the soul, it is critical that one recognize the value of relating to the outside world. In order for the power of the prayer to act upon the person praying and the community, the full purpose of prayer is that the Spirit of Hashem should inspire one to righteousness. Therefore, one should only pray in a house that has windows, for the opportunity to see the outside world will arouse him towards his obligations to the world in which he lives. In Matan, our large windows provide an open exchange between the world inside the Beit Midrash and the world outside, allowing us to address issues of social justice and the challenges of the modern world. We welcome to Matan all people who want to learn, religious, secular, old and young, and even men. Matan bears the name of Mindy Greenberg, who among all her many virtues was also Alan Dershowitz's cousin. Beit Midrash Yehudit was named in honor of Julia Koshitsky. Beit Midrash Dina named in memory of Dina Chagbi. The Pakanowski, did I say that right? Library was named for Fagel and Gabriel Yitzchak Pakanowski. The Shirat Danieli classroom and studio was named in memory of the young and pure soul of Daniel Sonnenfeld. To this distinguished list, we are privileged tonight to add your late mother, Claire Dershowitz, Mindy's aunt, with the dedication of Beit Midrash Chaya in her memory. I did not have the zchut to meet your mother, but having met the son, I am certain she was an Eshet Chaya. I would like to thank you all for coming and invite you to join our many programs. I would like each and every one of you to see Matan as your home for Torah studies. In order, now it's coming, to continue our important work, we need your support. Enjoy the evening.
And now it's not just a pleasure and an honor, it is something extremely emotional for me, and I'm sure for everyone here, to invite Debbie Tannenbaum. She is the niece of Claire Dershowitz and, of course, the sister of Mindy Greenberg.
It was perfectly natural growing up in a family of 5 girls to be surrounded with a sensitivity for women's religious education in our home. More than that, that concern followed me when I moved to Israel and I had to make important decisions about my own children's education. As many of us do, I discussed this issue with family members, seeking their advice and trying to find the proper solution to this challenging matter. One of those relatives who I greatly admired, respected, and played a very important role in my childhood was Claire Dershowitz, my mother's sister, our 2 families living door to door in Borough Park. She always showered us with her love, her warmth, and her wit, and was like a second mother to me and my sisters. To Aunt Claire, as the mother of 2 challenging boys, my sisters and I were always around to be her surrogate daughters. We all felt very close and shared a special relationship. She always gave an honest opinion, and yes, she always had an opinion on everything. She was ahead of her time in terms of her outlook on education and academia. She herself insisted that her younger sister, my mother, continue on to a college education. Claire was an active participant in adult education in the Young Israel of Borough Park and was always focused on broadening her horizons. Over the years, there has arisen a wider awareness for women's education in the religious world, and women have shown themselves to be more demanding and seeking out a more active part in their knowledge of religious studies. Today, having a place like Matan for women's studies has increased the possibilities for women to learn, devote time, and study in an organized, comprehensive, and original manner. She herself would have very much enjoyed participating in the intellectual stimulation and the study that takes place within these walls. How very fitting to have her name memorialized in this Beit Midrash by her 2 sons, Alan and Nathan, or Avi and Tuli, as she preferred to call them, both of whom have come to stand for so much for the state of Israel and the Jewish people on the world stage. A true recognition that so much of what has been created here would have been so fulfilling to her in her lifetime.
And now, thank you, that was beautiful, beautiful. And now I'd like to invite to come back up the Bernie Marenbach's Klezmer Troupe, but we have a special edition this evening. We have Itamar Ringel, and anyone who's ever read of any of Alan's books knows that one of the characters, his pseudonym is Abe Ringel in his books, because the Ringel family was real mishpacha, and we are honored to have Itamar, who is one of the most renowned international violists that we could even find in Ra'anana as a member of the Allen's family. So please, we're going to start with a solo Or with a duet, and then a solo.
It'll actually be a trio, and we want to dedicate it. First of all, the melody of the following song that we're going to play was written by Ben Zion Schenker, Zichrono Livracha, who passed away 2 weeks ago. We want to dedicate this melody and the words Eshet Chayil to the memory of Mindy Greenberg and Claire Dershowitz, Zichrono Livracha.
And now, I would like to dedicate the coming short nigun to Claire, just maybe to say a word about Claire, who she was for me. So actually, to demonstrate that, I would like to share a moment that was very special for me with Claire. At 2001, right after the Twin Towers fell, I was on tour in the US, and I gathered some family members, and I had a concert held for Claire in Norman's home. And after the concert, we sat together, and she taught me a lot of Yiddish tunes. And she was just an aunt I really loved, and my family as well. She was always very, very generous to all of us. And so the coming short nigun is called the Nigun of the Rabbi of Poltava, and it's sung mostly by Chabad Hasidim, and it's all about the memory and the good memories from Claire.
I think that was so good that we actually would you agree with me? We need one encore, okay? But to do that encore, we'll do it with a twist, the shinui, okay? Which means we're going to invite prematurely, I think someone who sang in the children's choir of the show. Moshe Kuzovitsky's choir. Now, we'll need a little bit of encouragement because we want Alan Dershowitz to overcome his shyness and come out of his shell. So, well, we're going to give you the mic, and the rest is up to Bernie. Uh-oh. Come on now. Get it. You don't need it. Start playing Bernie.
Okay.
Bernie, he'll take it. Bernie.
Okay. Go ahead. Okay.
Let's talk foreplay.
I just wanted to mention that this song is also dedicated to the memory of Mindy Greenberg and of Claire Dershowitz, Zichronam Livracha, a Yiddish mama.
In der Welt, jüdische Mama, wenn die Welt ist in die Welt, wenn ich lebte in mein Haus, Wasser and fire, wo sie gelacht im Vaterkind, haute den Teier, so sind gewiss gegräste sind. Ewig Glück und Reiche in der Mensch was hat, als Schein am Tonne geschenkt von Gott. Nur ein altische jüdische Mama.
You stole my line. That's a line I always end up with Bernie. All right. No. Kol Mosif Gorea. It was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So now, before we get to the main part of the program, and one very, very special person who I saved for last is, of course, Carolyn Cohen, Alan's wife. And if I don't mention her, then Alan will mention her, and then the whole evening will be spent about just talking about Carolyn. So Carolyn, it's really a pleasure to have you here with us on this trip. So before I call Alan, we actually gave this quite a bit of thought to try to craft an evening which would, I think, so far has started to give meaning both to the memory of Mindy and Claire, but also to this wonderful institute. So we're thinking who could actually do this and do this as a conversation with Alan Dershowitz, which is not easy. And we looked around, chipsu, and of course, it turned to one of my dearest friends, Yaakov Katz, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Yaakov is a faculty member and lecturer at the Harvard University's Extension School. You've heard of the Harvard, Alan? And he teaches there an advanced course in journalism. His new book, The Weapon Wizards, How Israel Became a High-Tech Military Superpower, will be published by St. Martin's Press in January. In 2012-2013, Yaakov was one of 12 international fellows to spend a year at the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard. Originally from Chicago, Katz also has a law degree, from Bar-Ilan University. He lives in Jerusalem with his wife and 4 children. And now I'm going to tell you the real Yaakov Katz story. Yaakov Katz, I have 2 really great friends who've worked for the Jerusalem Post forever. One is Yaakov Katz, the other is Gil Hoffman. And I actually asked both of them for years and years and years the same question. Yaakov grew up, he was the military correspondent. And I say, Gil, you are the political correspondent of the Jerusalem Post in a country where politicians, we have the former president in jail, the former prime minister in jail. I said, how can you not get disappointed? Wait a minute, stop. Yaakov, you are the military correspondent of the Jerusalem Post in a country where Hezbollah and Hamas together have 100,000 rockets aimed at our hearts. Iran is feverishly developing nuclear weapons to send at us. How can you not get discouraged? You know what they both said? I'm from Chicago, I'm a Cubs fan, I can take it. With that, I'd also like to call, at this point, Alan Dershowitz. We've heard his CV already from Zevik. Wait a second, Alan. I just want to say one thing about they left out of the CV, is that he's written over 35 books, and some of the more famous ones, Chutzpah. And book of Chutzpah is actually very definitive about Alan, because people think about Chutzpah, Chutzpah, this is Chutzpah, in the sense that he wrote the book, is the highest purpose of chutzpah, which was chutzpah klepei shmaya, to actually, that's the first place that we find it written there, and it talks about a person who stands up, and this is one thing that Alan Dershowitz has always stand up, don't stand up just yet, but he was also the student, like in the Talmudic story of Rav Yirmiyah, the student who, remember the story where the one bird has 1 foot on one side, 1 foot on the other side, and for that Rav Yirmiyah was thrown out of the Bet Midrash. But he was always asking the hard questions. And a few years ago, when we unveiled one of his amazing books, not a book about law, not a book about international relations, but a book about Yiddishkeit, about Torah, if you will. It was a book, The Genesis of Justice, which he had written, which is amazing. If you've never read it, go out, buy it today. It's a terrific book. It talks about the hard problems and the learning curve that which we find in the Torah about Rishis. And we unveiled it at Mishkenot, where he's going to be, and his uncle Zechariah, who many of you know from Bar-Ilan University, looked at the book. He says, Javi, good book, great book. He says, not quite a sefer, but a good book. And he says, would you mind doing just one thing, just change one little word in the entire book? And he said, for you, Uncle Zechariah, of course. What word do you want me to change?
Dershowitz on the top.
But I think you'll hear tonight, we're actually doing something we call it the evening for the soul of Israel. You should know what Alan's doing this week. He started the week at Globes, where he spoke with 1,000 young people, inspiring them. He then spoke with 20 young CEOs. He then spoke today with the legal defender for Israel in front of 500 students at Tel Aviv University, law student, about law. And tomorrow is going to be in Mishkenot with Ambassador Dori Gold. And in between, he has meetings with the President, Prime Minister, the Minister of Hasbara, you name it. This is what he does. And now it is our pleasure to bring him to talk about the case for the case of the soul of Israel.
I'm going to guess, though, that this was the one place that you sang in Yiddish, though, of all your talks. Right?
Yep. Sorry.
So it's an honor to be able to share the stage with you, and to, over the years at the Jerusalem Post, also to be able to run your op-eds on occasion. We get them. So I'll just jump right into it. I'm sure you'll have some stuff you'll want to say, but I think what a lot of people here would like to hear from you, especially, is the United States in the Trump era, right? It seems to, I think, a lot of people right now who are watching what's happening in New York and Washington, that this is an administration that seems inexperienced, seems like it might not know exactly what it's doing, and we'd be interested to hear your take on it.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this wonderful place of learning. my mother would be so proud. My mother was an early feminist, an egalitarian, particularly within the context of Orthodox Judaism. She loved the fact that her sister Shirley had 5 brilliant girls. When my mother was asked, don't you feel that you've been deprived? You don't have any daughters. She had 2 sons. My mother would say, oh, I have 5 daughters. They happen to be born to Shirley, but, you know, they're my daughters. And my mother was very, very anxious to see them grow up, and they grew up wonderfully. I was their babysitter, and I was paid 75 cents an hour. And so I have a wonderful story about that. The year I started practicing law in 1964, I was called by the state of Connecticut and asked if I would help them draft their mental health code. And I said, sure. And they said, and we're going to pay you, $60 an hour. And I said, I used to get 75 an hour when I was babysitting. And they said, no, $60 an hour. I said, you're going to pay me $60 an hour? I couldn't believe it. If I knew that, I would have asked your mommy for a raise to at least $1. Shirley and Leo played a very important part in my own life growing up next door to them. The 5 daughters all had so much in common, most particularly something I see generationally in every one of their descendants, the most beautiful smile and the most beautiful countenance and a willingness to make everybody feel at home and happy all the time. And I want to mention, so not only Mindy's parents, who meant so much to me, but Mindy's parents-in-law, Yitz and Blue Greenberg, who were so important in my life. I don't know if you know this, but I knew Blue before your father knew Blue. She used to come from her obscure place somewhere in, I don't know, Tacoma or Seattle, Washington or somewhere, to the Pioneer Country Club for Pesach. And she was always, we were told by her parents, looking to marry a nice Orthodox Jew from the East Coast. And we all tried, but Yitz prevailed. And Yitz was the first person in my life to tell me I was smart. And I said to him, Rabbi Greenberg, I'm not smart, I just have a good memory. I got a good memory from my mother. And he insisted, he said I was smart. And it was important for him to tell me that because my rabbis in Brooklyn Talmudical Academy had told me quite the opposite. Rabbi Zuraf called me in one day and said, you know, Dershowitz, you got a good mouth on you, but a Yiddish cup you do not have. You should figure out something you have to do, talking a lot but not thinking a lot. He said, I have 2 suggestions. One, you could be a lawyer. Second, you could be a conservative rabbi. He couldn't even pronounce the word reform. And so I wasn't smart enough to be a rabbi, so I became a lawyer. And I want to make a special mention here also of the man who kept my mother alive until 95, and that is Morty Leibowitz, who I went to BTA with. And if you're really nice, I'll tell you what a bandit. He was almost as bad a bandit as I was in Brooklyn Talmudical Academy, and we both did okay. And so I remember Mindy, of course, as such a sweet, brilliant, terrific young woman. And so I'm so pleased to be participating in this event and to be dedicating this beautiful, beautiful place of learning to my mother. The only thing I ask is that you ask me back one day to learn with you, if you allow me in. And today I spoke at Tel Aviv University, and I spoke about the influence of the Rambam on American jurisprudence and the influence, of course, of the Talmud. For years I taught courses on the scriptural influences on world justice, and always used the Rambam and many other Jewish sources. When I first started teaching at Harvard, I remember I got a complaint by somebody that, why don't I just quote Blackstone like everybody else? Why am I quoting Rashi? Why am I quoting these other sources? And I said, because Jews have been thinking about legal issues for thousands of years before the British ever started thinking about legal issues, and to ignore a whole jurisprudence that has developed incredibly over so many millennia would be educational malpractice. And so I continued to teach from all the sources, eclectically, from British sources as well as from rabbinic and other sources. So now from the sublime to the ridiculous, we're going to talk about the Trump administration. So as you probably can guess, I was not an enthusiastic Trump supporter. My wife and I are very close friends of Hillary Clinton, and we worked closely with her. We were close to Bill Clinton, and I was hoping that she would win the election. But I actually wrote a book think Carolyn has it here. In August of this year, when Hillary Clinton was ahead by 12 points, I'm sorry, it has a title that might not be appropriate in a place of learning. It was called Electile Dysfunction, a guide for unaroused voters. And it was based on the fact that so many voters hated both candidates and were voting against rather than for a candidate. But in the middle of August, I wrote, when she was 12 points ahead, that probably Trump would win the election, and that this was a populist election. It was following a global trend toward extremism on both sides of the political spectrum. The left is getting much further left, the right is getting further right. Populism prevails, and that results in unpredictability. And so I want to first speak briefly about its impact on Israel and the Jewish people. The Jewish people thrive at the center. We always have thrived at the center. Going back to the beginning of history, we thrive at the center. We have always suffered from extremes, either right or left. And Jews were seduced by extremes. Many Jews were seduced by the extremes of communism in the 20s and 30s, only to be stabbed in the back by Stalin. Today, too many Jews are being seduced by the hard right and feel that as long as they're not anti-Semitic, it doesn't matter if they're anti-Muslim or anti-woman or anti-anything else. And people like Geert Wilders in the Netherlands or Le Pen in France, who are trying very hard to seduce Jews, saying we have a common enemy, the Muslim people. I think it's important to resist that temptation. As I say, Jews thrive as liberal centrists, conservative centrists. I have tremendous admiration for my conservative friends, and I hate my radical left people, and I spend more time attacking the radical left than I ever do attacking the right, because I am of the left, so I have a responsibility to make sure that the left, which is anti-Israel and often anti-Semitic, doesn't become mainstream, just as centrist conservatives, I think, have an obligation to make sure that the alt-right doesn't become part of the mainstream.
But correct me if I'm wrong, you've come out in defense of Bannon.
No, I thought it was a terrible appointment, and I was against it. What I said was, just because he's a bigot and anti-Muslim and anti-woman, don't call him an anti-Semite without any evidence. There's absolutely no evidence that Bannon is anti-Semitic. That's not defending him. That's saying, call him what he is, anti-Muslim, anti-woman, anti-gay, anti-many things. But just because you don't like somebody, it's not right to throw around the term anti-Semite. So I was very, very clear about that. I've also made the same points about Keith Ellison, who is now about to be appointed head of the Democratic National Committee from the hard left, who has many, many problems and hope is not appointed to the head of the Democratic Committee. So I think the one thing we can say for absolute certain about the Trump administration is it will be unpredictable, and that we will not know until we see it what's happening. You cannot figure out a policy based on who his appointments are. I can tell you that his appointments certainly don't reflect his campaign. His appointments were cleaning up the swamp, not having anybody from Goldman Sachs, not having anybody from Wall Street, not having anybody from big business. So virtually everybody he's appointed either comes from big business or Goldman Sachs. The person he's likely to appoint to be ambassador to Israel is somebody who collected $1 million in contributions for him without an enormous amount of experience in Middle East affairs, not a professional diplomat. So I think we're going to see the campaigner Trump, the transition Trump. We've seen both of those. We haven't seen the President Trump. Having said that, as soon as the election was done, even though Hillary Clinton won the popular by 2.5 million votes, he won the Electoral College. You can't complain about that. That's like saying that your team was cheated in soccer because they had more shots on goal, but the other team managed to score 1 goal and it was 1-0. The rules are the Electoral College. So he is the president. As soon as that was announced, I wrote to his and called his campaign people and said, I'm available to him 24/7 on any issues relating to Israel, any issues relating to the Middle East. I've made that offer to every president since I have become interested in Israel in the late 60s and early 70s, and I've made that same offer to every prime minister of Israel, whether I agree with them or not. I'm available to assist in helping to resolve conflicts involving Israel. So my hope here today is 4 years from now, when you invite me back and we can learn together, I will tell you, wow, I was wrong. I am going to vote for Trump with enthusiasm. He turned out to be a great president. Do I think that's likely? No. Do I hope that's likely? Yes. Will I try to make it likely? Absolutely. I will do everything in my power to make him a great president. But I'm not optimistic that that will happen. As far as Israel is concerned, it's just not clear. I think it opens up tremendous opportunities. Because Obama was a disaster when it came to foreign policy. I supported Obama. I voted for him. He'll go down in history as having the greatest disparity in American history between domestic achievement and international achievement, second only to Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain was a great, great domestic prime minister. He helped bring about widows and orphans aid. He helped deal with the Depression. He would have gone down in history as an incredible prime minister domestically, but he failed to see the greatest evil in the world and recognize it. And President Obama has done great things with health care and with other aspects of domestic policy, but I cannot imagine a worse foreign policy president, except perhaps for his predecessor who brought us into the Iraq war. But from the President Obama's point of view, he managed to do something that no other president has ever done. Almost every other president, either the Palestinians liked him or the Israelis liked him. Or if the Palestinians liked him, the Israelis didn't like him. President Obama has managed to alienate the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Jordanians, the Saudis, the Emirates, the Egyptians. There's only one country in the Middle East that has really, really admired him, the Iranians. And that is not a great resume for history. And what he's done too is he's created a horrible vacuum in the Middle East in which the Russians entered. And now the Russians are providing the Iranians with defense measures. Israel has been provided, of course, with the new Stealth 35, which hopefully can overcome those measures. But what's going on today in Aleppo, the disasters, the humanitarian crises that are going on, you have to put a finger of blame directed at the Obama administration for its failures. Its single greatest failure was when it set a red line and said if Syria is going to use chemical weapons, we will have no choice but to attack Syria, use chemical weapons again and again and again, and they're still using them. And Obama said, whoops, sorry, not going to do it this time. And that sent a message all over the world of weakness, and it encouraged Putin, who always senses weakness, to move in. So I think we may see an improvement in foreign policy, but I can't be sure because one doesn't know what the foreign policy is really going to be.
You mentioned Russia.
Yeah.
Rex Tillerson, his appointment now as Secretary of State. The ties with Russia, reports of Russia's involvement, potential hacking of the U.S. elections. I saw that you said at the Globes conference, I think it was, that Israel's been wise and Netanyahu's been wise in the way he's maneuvered the Russian presence in Syria, but this is not concerning as an American?
Of course it is. Of course it is. I have no doubt that Russian services, don't know how high up it goes, but of course in Russia nothing is done without the personal approval of Putin, did try to influence the outcome of the election. Now, there are two possible ways that you can influence the outcome of an election. One is by manipulating the actual votes, by hacking the machines. There's no evidence that happened, and nobody should suspect that that happened unless there is evidence. The vote was a legitimate vote. I don't think there was any hacking of the machines. That could happen in the future. No evidence it happened here. But what the Russians did do, and I know this because Assange is one of my clients. I've been representing him in his work in WikiLeaks, and that is what the Russians did do is leaked to WikiLeaks emails from the Democratic National Committee, but not from the Republicans. They hacked both. And I cannot believe that there were no emails between Republicans that would have been embarrassing. It's in the nature of emails, and please, if you're using them, learn a lesson. How to make sure that nothing you ever send by email should be deemed to be private. But clearly, they selectively leaked embarrassing material from the Democrats in an effort to influence the election. That doesn't mean you get a do-over. These kinds of external factors always are at play. If there had been manipulation of the voting machines, that might result in a re-election. But that would have caused a civil war in the United States. I think that if the Supreme Court had ruled, hypothetically, that Trump is not the winner and that there has to be a revote because of manipulations of machines, I honestly believe for the first time since 1860, people would have taken up arms and there would be a bloody revolution in the streets of the United States, and I'm not sure it wouldn't have been encouraged by the president-elect. So I do think that Russia is trying to play a very dangerous role. And if it plays it in the United States, it can be playing it in the French election coming up. There are other major elections coming up. And I think we have to take measures to make sure that doesn't happen. I do think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing a very smart thing. He saw that American weaknesses and vacuums, and so he went and tried to establish better relations with the Russians, with the Indians, with the Chinese, with the Brazilians, with the Argentinians. Not easy. With African nations, he's, as we speak now, in Kazakhstan or in one of the other stands, Azerbaijan. That's a good thing. Those are two Muslim nations, one a Sunni, one a Shia nation. He's trying to establish better relations with the Emirates and with Saudi Arabia. That will never be complete until and unless the Israeli-Palestine conflict is resolved. And in my view, and I may not be saying what many of you in this room agree with, I think there's no better time in modern history for the Israeli government to see if there's any possibility of reaching out to the very imperfect leader of the Palestinian Authority and see what the possibilities are for moving toward resolution, because Saudi Arabia will never embrace Israel completely until the Jerusalem issue is resolved and until other issues that are of great importance to the Saudis are resolved. Now, more important than any of those issues to the Saudis is the threat from Iran, and that's why they're making some cooperative moves toward Israel, and I think Israel can reciprocate and try, without endangering its security at all, ever, under any circumstances, see if there's any possibility of moving in that direction.
Now, we mentioned Bannon, but you wrote recently that what's new is the anti-Semitism from the right has become emboldened and now almost catching up with the anti-Semitism on the hard left, which has been in existence for 20 years. So we saw the alt-right, we see Breitbart, we see some of the appointments, or I don't know, Bannon, you're saying he's not an anti-Semite, no proof of that, but regardless, the culture and the rhetoric that was going around, especially, and you were a target of some of it, or Jewish journalists in the US who came under fire from people who supposedly supported Trump's candidacy. What does this mean for, Jews are getting hit by the left, Black Lives Matter, you're getting hit now from the right, alt-right. What does this mean for the future? Well,
that's what I'm most afraid of. What I'm most afraid of is the pincer movement from the right and the left, and I know because I experienced it personally. Within 1 or 2 days, Arutz Sheva journalist called me a dibuk and said I shouldn't be allowed to claim that I'm pro-Israel because I support the two-state solution, and I didn't support Trump, and if you didn't support Trump, you can't be pro-Israel. Read Arutz Sheva 2 days ago and read my response today on Arutz Sheva. At the same time, I'm repeatedly attacked by the hard left because of my criticism of Black Lives Matter. Black lives do matter, but Black Lives Matter cannot use that as an excuse for calling Israel genocidal and apartheid. And I became the first high-profile person to separate myself from Black Lives Matter and urge everybody else of goodwill to separate themselves until Black Lives Matter removes from its program and its platform the blood libel against the nation state of the Jewish people. They haven't done it, and I haven't come back to Black Lives Matter. So what I'm worried about, particularly on college campuses today, is a new concept. It's called intersectionality. And there were big signs at the Democratic Convention, intersectionality matters. Probably very few of you have heard of it, but it's very dominant on American college campuses. And what it says is, all discriminated against groups, Muslims, women, gays, African Americans, they're all oppressed together, the same forms of oppression, and they're all oppressed by, you can guess, American colonialists and American capitalists and Zionists. Zionists are at the top of their list, and therefore, on college campuses today, you can't favor environmental rights unless you're prepared to condemn Israel. You can't favor women's rights or black rights or environmental rights, as I said, or give you an example. Everybody acknowledges that there's no better country in the Middle East than probably no better country in the world in creating equality for gay and lesbian people than Israel. Israel, before the United States, when the United States still had a don't ask, don't tell policy, Israel wasn't asking any questions about gays in the military. Gays were serving in high levels of intelligence. And so how do the anti-Israel people turn that? They call it pinkwashing. They say what Israel is doing to support gay rights is only designed to cover what they're doing terribly to the Palestinian people. They're whitewashing it, but we call it pinkwashing. Now there's a new concept called art washing. Oh, sure, Israel has great art and artists and culture, but they do that in order to cover what they're doing. The same thing they're doing now to high tech. Don't buy Israel high tech because it uses its great technological innovations. Well, the essence of anti-Semitism is to say that anything the Jews do good must have a bad motive. And by the way, the people who are pushing this pinkwashing are Jews. Our greatest enemies, I would say our second greatest enemies, our greatest enemies are Jewish Americans like Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein. Our greatest enemy are Israelis. The Israelis on the hard left, the Gideon Levis of the world, who write for Haaretz. They pose our greatest threat to intellectual defense of Israel. Because what happens is kids on college campuses say, Gideon Levy, what could be a more Jewish or Israeli name? Or Gilad Atzmon in England, who's a clarinetist who thinks the Holocaust didn't occur, but he thinks that Jews did kill Christians and drink their blood in matzah. But his name is Gilad Atzmon, and his name is Gideon Levy, and it's Haaretz. What could be more Jewish or Zionist? And if they say Israel is apartheid and genocidal, and worse than the Nazis, Norman Finkelstein said, the Nazis should be insulted by being compared to Israel because Israel is so much worse. Or Bishop Tutu, who says that Israeli apartheid is worse than anything that happened in South Africa. What a horrible thing to say. He suffered from apartheid. I represented Mandela. I know what apartheid was. I edited the first article in 1960 on the legal structure of apartheid. And to say, for a Nobel Peace Prize winner to say that Israel apartheid is worse than anything the South African blacks suffered under apartheid is both a combination of a lie and a blood libel. And so we have these really serious problems, particularly for our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, nieces and nephews, who go to college today and confront this unbelievable anti-Zionism which makes Israel sound like the worst nation in the history of the world, but you can combat it. So I was invited to debate last year at Oxford University and to debate the BDS movement. And the chairman of the Oxford Union, a very lovely young senior at college, said, I want to warn you, Professor Dershowitz, you can't come to Oxford and expect to get a fair shake on Israel. You're going to lose the debate, but maybe you'll persuade a few people. Well, my wife was with me, and my granddaughter was a student at Oxford last year, so I said, A, I have to take the challenge, and B, I can't lose in front of my granddaughter. She had never seen me even argue before. So we had the debate, and hundreds and hundreds of students showed up, and they all started with a very strong anti-Israel bias. But after explaining to them how many times Israel sought peace and giving them a brief history of the Peel Commission, the 1947 division, the 48 wars, 67, 90, Oslo, 2000, 2001, Olmert, 2008, they stood there with their mouths open. They never heard that. They never heard that Israel ever wanted peace or sought peace. And then I went out into the audience and I said, you can watch this all on YouTube. It's there available. I said, I want any of you to shout out the name of a country, any country in the world faced with threats comparable to those faced by Israel that has had a better record of human rights, a higher level of compliance with the rule of law, and more concern with civilian casualties among enemies. Nobody would shout out a single country. And we ended up winning the debate at Oxford University, which was quite shocking to me. I wanted to debate Barghouti, the developer of the BDS movement, but he wouldn't debate me because he said, you're part of the movement. You are boycotted. We can't debate you. We can't participate with you in any events. So somebody else did the debate, and we ended up prevailing.
So, let me just say that you asked what could be more Zionist than Gideon Levy and Haaretz. Well, I can just plug the Jerusalem Post very briefly. So let's talk a second about Iran. You were, and you mentioned this just briefly before, you were a big opponent of the deal. You wrote the case against the Iran deal, I read somewhere, in 11 days, which means you really had it at the tip of your finger or tongue, and you knew how to get it out fast. But it's a done deal. And I think that, I recently had a talk with the IDF Chief of Staff, and I think if you go into IDF headquarters and you talk to the top military officers there, some of them will tell you this is actually, it gives us some breathing room. It gives us the opportunity not to have to think about a strike against Iran tomorrow. We can think about what we have to do in 10 to 15 years. But right now, we get to take a step back. So assuming that we're not going to rip up the deal, what should Trump do? What should Netanyahu be asking Trump in that first meeting that they have?
So I wrote an op-ed exactly directed at that question. It was entitled, "Don't Rip Up the Deal, Enforce It." And people forget that the opening chapter of the deal, the opening chapter twice has the following sentence: Iran reaffirms that it will never, under any circumstances, seek to develop or acquire nuclear weapons. That's in the deal. Now, the deal has a sunset clause, and it stops in 8, 10, 12 years, depending on which part of it. But all that does is allows them to develop centrifuges. But the development of centrifuges is allowed in the context of Iran's commitment never to develop nuclear weapons. So I have urged Trump to announce that it's American policy that Iran will never, ever, under any circumstances, be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, and to have Congress now authorize the president to take military action to enforce that part of the deal, to give him advance authorization to do that so he doesn't have to go back to Congress. And I think that combination will serve to deter Iran if they really think that the United States means it. Look, Iran's not going to be able to develop nuclear weapons. Why? Because no prime minister of Israel, I don't care if it's Benjamin Netanyahu, Tzipi Livni, Herzog, no prime minister of Israel, if they get solid intelligence that Iran is on the verge of developing a nuclear arsenal, will allow that to happen. That's why Israel has the stealth 35s. That's why Israel is trying to get, and with Trump probably will get, the bunker busting bombs, the ability to go deep into the mountains and destroy the facility. So the question is not whether Iran develops nuclear weapons, the question is who stops it. And if Israel does it alone, it will be at great cost, militarily, lives, treasure, and international standing. But if the United States does it, or the United States and Israel, better yet, the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia do it jointly, it can really have a positive effect. Now, the most important thing is General Washington said during the Revolutionary War, he said the best way to prevent war is to have your enemy know you're ready to wage it. And if the Iranians know that the United States will prevent them from developing nuclear weapons, I think they won't do that. I think they won't take that risk. So it's very important that Israel, the United States, the Saudis together create a sufficient deterrent and disincentive so that Israel, the United States, don't have to use the military force it now possesses. But I think you can sleep safely in knowing that Iran will not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. I think that's a given.
So basically, if Trump does what Obama failed to do all these years, which is overtly or just straight out threaten Iran, that if you go and break out and to enrich uranium to military levels, we will attack you.
That's right. That's what he should do. That should be American foreign policy, and that's justified by the deal. You don't have to break the deal. All you say is, we take you at your word. The deal says Iran reaffirms that it will never, under any circumstances, seek to develop or obtain. That's the beginning. That's the beginning of the deal. Everything else in it has to be understood in the context of that opening statement. And if the President of the United States were to announce that clearly, I think that would be a tremendous step forward.
So when we look at the region, and you touched on this earlier, if there's one thing that connects all the different countries here, Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, it's not just a fear and hatred of Iran, but it's also a huge disappointment and frustration with Barack Obama as president. And I think that that's...
I would add one more factor.
Go ahead.
And that is justified fear of Turkey, which has become the real joker in the deck in the Middle East. Nobody here can predict what Turkey will look like in 5 years. And remember, Iran is no Turkey. Iran is a relatively weak country with a relatively weak armed forces. Turkey is a superpower. It's part of NATO. It has an army that in some ways is superior to Israel's army, if for no other reason than its size. And Israel hasn't prepared for a potential military encounter with Turkey. I don't think it's going to happen, because I don't think it's in Turkey's interest to do that. But you cannot discount the possibility that this Erdogan character who makes Trump look like the most stable, predictable person in the world. We just don't know what Erdogan is going to do.
But what I want to ask you is, what does President Trump do tomorrow to restore America's standing here in the region? For the red lines, you got Russia and Syria. What can he do? Because I believe, for example, that a strong America means a strong Israel. A weak America, perceived as weak, means that Israel is perceived by its adversaries as also being weak.
That's true, but it's less true than it was 2 years ago. Because 2 years ago, America's weakness was Israel's weakness, because America was Israel's most important and almost exclusive ally. I think with the way that Israel is building alliances outside of the United States, it's not as true as it was, but it's still very true. I want to see a strong United States. I want to see a strong President Trump. I want to see him not a warmonger. I don't want to see him make the same mistake that we made in Iraq. And by the way, people forget that Prime Minister Sharon urged President Bush not to go into Iraq, not to occupy Iraq, not to destabilize a country that was committing horrible offenses. You know, the one thing that the last 15 years has taught us, it's to not love, but at least understand tyrants aren't the worst thing in the world. Tyrants may be the second worst thing. But when tyrants like Mubarak were overthrown and replaced by the Muslim Brotherhood, when tyrants like Gaddafi were replaced, when tyrants like the Shah were replaced by, it's much worse. So the enemy you know, in some ways, may be a lot safer than the enemy you don't know. And therefore, you know, I think it's important that we understand that it's in Israel's interest and America's interest not always to topple stable tyrants, but rather to keep the stability that comes with them rather than to accept. And I think Trump understands that. He said he's not looking for regime change. And so I hope he has a strong foreign policy. I know his new director of the CIA, who was a student at Harvard Law School, brilliant, brilliant guy. His Secretary of Defense has a very mixed reputation. The military love him. They think he's in Israel, like him very much, but he's made some statements about Israel that are very troubling. He's been very strong on Iran, but very critical of Israel in other respects. We just don't know. It's very hard to discern a pattern from the appointments. They seem very ad hoc to me in many ways.
So let me just preface the next question by saying we are in Renana, and we're in I guess most of the people here are Anglo, so we could assume maybe where their political where they lean politically. But you mentioned two-state solution. You mentioned the Prime Minister. I'm curious, 60 Minutes, he just gave that interview the other day.
Right.
He said, I am committed, I look forward to working with President Trump and to making peace here in the Middle East. Do you think he's sincere after 9 years as Prime Minister where
Absolutely.
we really haven't advanced?
Not only do I think it, I think I know it. I've known Benjamin Netanyahu since 1970, before many of you were born. We met on a show called The Advocates when he was a student at MIT and I was a young professor. We then met again in 1973 during a celebration of Israel's 50th anniversary. Bibi, who I don't call Bibi when he's the Prime Minister, I call him Mr. Prime Minister, I regard as a close personal friend. Carolyn regards Sarah as a close personal friend. Our first stop when we come to the United States is to have dinner with Bibi and Sarah, which we did for 5.5 hours last Thursday night. Even he doesn't know who I would vote for if I were an Israeli, because I don't take positions on Israeli elections. I make what I call the 80% case for Israel. That is, I try to argue about all the things that there is consensus in Israel about, and I try to stay away from the dispute between Bennett and Netanyahu or the dispute between Lieberman and Netanyahu. That's for you guys to resolve. You're Israelis. For me, it's to defend Israel in general. But I know Bibi well enough to know he wants to be Nixon in China. He wants to be the conservative guy who managed to bring about peace with security, to get a better deal than Olmert offered, to get a better deal than Barack offered, but to make peace. He would love nothing more than to do that. The problem is the Israeli political system is broken. And it's very, very broken. You know, the President of the United States gets elected. He's the chief executive. He picks a cabinet. Anybody who looks at him funny, they're fired. the prime minister puts together a cabinet. Half of them want to stab him in the back. The other half want to run against him. The other half are leaking to Yediot Ahronot and to channel, channel 2 or 10. And so it's very hard to govern.
Yeah, but his critics will tell you is that makes sense. You can make that excuse for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but he's been running now since 2009, so 8 years consecutive prime minister. You can't use that excuse forever.
No, and if I thought it was an excuse, I would say so. I do think, though, he has never, I was hoping, my own hope, without saying who I would vote for, my own hope was that either he would win an overwhelming majority, so we wouldn't have to include some of the people from the extreme right, or it would be so close that he'd have to bring Herzog in to the coalition. Neither of those things happened. And so he now is in a situation where every time he moves toward anything that the right, people to the right of him are against, his government is in danger. And it makes it very hard to maneuver. And I think, every prime minister has an obligation to be a statesperson first and a politician second. And I'm not making any excuses for him. I hope he is a statesman who can put aside politics and become a leader that can at least make an offer. Now, the Palestinians may not accept. Remember, they didn't accept. And by the way, you know who the villain of, people don't know this, the villain of Camp David, when Ehud Barak and Bill Clinton made the most generous offers to the Palestinians, guess who told Arafat to turn it down? Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was advising Arafat, and he told him that if he accepted that deal, which would have given statehood to the Palestinian people, he would be killed. I always refer to Arafat's death as untimely death, because if he had only died 4 years earlier, I think there might have been peace. And I'm not going to say anything about Jimmy Carter, but I just think he has been a force for terrible evil in the Middle East. And his most recent op-ed was so naive and so stupid. The idea that the issue should be turned over to the UN, that the United States should recognize a Palestinian state, what does that do? It disincentivizes the Palestinians to come to the bargaining table. It says to them, you don't have to make sacrifices, you don't have to make compromises, you don't have to negotiate with the Israelis. Jimmy Carter will get you a state, the United States will get you a state, the UN will get you a state, the International Criminal Court will get you a state, the BDS movement will get you a state. There's no surprise that the leadership of the Palestinian Authority is actually against the BDS movement, officially. Because they know that it sends a false message to the Palestinians that they can win this battle without negotiating with the Israelis. And everybody knows that the road to peace has to come through Ramallah, it has to come through Jerusalem. I want to all ask you a Trivial Pursuit question. So when students from Harvard or other places, non-Jews, non-Zionists, come to Israel for the first time, having been propagandized against Israel, where do you think the first place they should go is? Just shout out a couple of, other than Ra'anana. Of course Ra'anana is the first place. But after Ra'anana, after meeting the mayor, and after studying a little bit at Matan, where should they go? What do you think? Ramallah is the answer. They should go to Ramallah. It's the first place they should go. Because A, they will see the lie they've been fed. Americans think that if they go to the West Bank, they will see Israelis with whips having the Palestinians build pyramids. They will think that what they're seeing is, concentration camps with Gestapo guards. You take them to Ramallah, what do they see? They see the most beautiful city in the Middle East. They see it looks like Jerusalem. The best restaurants, high-tech stores, Mercedes. You don't see a single Israeli policeman. You don't see a single Israeli soldier. And they say to themselves, this is what we've been told about? We're really going to come and look at the rest of what we've been told with a skeptical eye. It also shows them what a Palestinian state could look like. If there were peace, all of the West Bank would have a Marshall Plan. It could look like Ramallah. And so that's why I urge students to go first to Ramallah, then they can go to the Kotel, then they can go to the Museum of the Holocaust. But Ramallah is so important for them to see what peace could look like.
And Abbas is that partner for peace?
Abbas is the partner for peace. Look, you know, Abbas is their president. Trump is our president. The difference is Trump got elected. Abbas got elected, I think,
2006.
Yeah, I was going to say 2,000 years ago. But, you know, I think there's supposed to have been a couple of elections. But don't pray for elections so soon. I remember urging the United States government not to push for elections in the Gaza. When they pushed for it, it was a mistake. Gaza was not ready for elections, and look at the results. So, you know, we don't know whether elections would be good or bad for the Palestinian Authority at this point.
So you're one of Israel's strongest advocates. You're on the front lines. That's no secret. We don't have a foreign minister for about a year now.
Well, he's the prime minister.
The prime minister is, we don't have a full-time foreign minister. So if you're not taking the job.
No, this hasn't been offered. Right.
What can we do? What are we not doing right in terms of explaining ourselves? It could be that we also need to have a full-time foreign minister.
Well, first of all, before you explain yourself, you have to have a policy that you're willing to explain. And I think the first thing that Israel has to do is put on the table, at least preliminarily, some aspects of a peace plan. Now, it shouldn't put the whole plan on the table, because you don't put your cards on the table, you negotiate. And once you put something out, you can't pull back from that. That's what's wrong with the French proposal at the Security Council of the UN. The Palestinians could never accept less than that, and they're not going to get that. So it makes their bargaining position impossible. But I think every day there should be news that the Israelis have offered the Palestinians, and the Palestinians have rejected the following. The other thing in here, we're going to get very controversial, but you don't bring me anywhere not to be controversial. I really do think that although I support the continuation of the current settlement blocks and the keeping of the settlement blocks in any peace prospect, certainly those settlement blocks that are close to Jerusalem, nobody's giving up Ma'ale Adumim and Gilo and Efrat and the Etzion block. I do think it's a mistake, and I think there are many Israelis, most Israelis, and I think even some in the government think it's a mistake to start building extensively outside the settlement blocks. I have no problems with building up within the settlement blocks rather than building out. But I do think that Israel has to, that's not a security issue. Israel should never, ever listen to the world, to the New York Times, or to anybody else on issues of security. Israel should say to the New York Times, on issues of security, mind your own business. When the United States starts taking risks for its security, that when they allow Cuban missiles to be in the shores of Havana, then you'll tell Israel what to do. So Israel should never, ever listen to the world, the UN, anybody on security issues. Settlements are not security issues. Many think they're anti-security issues, that they undercut Israel's security. On issues like settlements, I think that Israel has to take into account world opinion. And let me give you a very specific instance. If the Amona bill is passed, two things will happen. One, the International Criminal Court, which is now reluctant to take jurisdiction, will take jurisdiction. It will be a provocation. Second, if the Amona bill were to be passed in the next 2 weeks, the President of the United States would have no choice but to say, I'm not going to veto the French Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlements. You cannot ignore that reality. You can disagree with it, and you should ignore the reality if it affects Israel's security. But you cannot ignore that reality when it comes to political considerations around the settlements. And that's a tough message for me to give you, but I'm giving it to you from my heart.
So we need a settlement freeze.
We need a kind of settlement freeze. I wouldn't use that term, but I would be a little bit more precise as to what it means. I wouldn't create, first of all, there's no justification under Israeli law for creating legal settlements. So that's the first thing that should stop. Second of all, settlements on land owned by Palestinians should be stopped. Third, it's not enough to take land and give payment for that. That doesn't satisfy international law. So I wouldn't use the term settlement freeze because it connotes something, and it also suggests no building up. I have no objection to a family in Ma'ale Adumim adding a few bedrooms or bathrooms to their house because they have children and grandchildren. And also, having talked about a settlement freeze, you have to deal with Jerusalem. You have to deal with East Jerusalem. And so there are big differences. I think Jerusalem is hard. I think settlement building outside of the settlement blocks, way, way, way deep into the Palestinian Authority, I think that's an easy question.
I want to switch gears and talk a bit about Jewish topics.
Sure.
In your book, Genesis of Justice, you seem to argue for a diverse, pluralistic, big tent Jewish nation, right? One in which secular Jews, like yourself, can feel together a sense of peoplehood with observant, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, but diverse and pluralistic.
Right.
You look at Israel today. You look at the issue of the Kotel,
Right.
where the government passed a resolution a year ago in January of 2016 to establish a third pluralistic prayer platform.
Right.
Has not implemented that. You look at the lack of separation of religion and state here. How much is this creating a divide between us and Israel and Jews of the diaspora?
Well, let me just show you the difference in the United States. So I am a secular Jew who goes to an Orthodox synagogue. I go to Park East because I love the chazan, I love the rabbi, and I love the people. And I'm used to davening in the Orthodox tradition. My wife, who was brought up conservative and reform in Charleston, South Carolina, doesn't like to sit separate from me in Park East, so she tends to go to a conservative shul, or sometimes even the Central Synagogue on 3rd Avenue, which, believe it or not, has as its rabbi a Korean woman who is a marvelous. You should look at her on YouTube sometime. She started out as chazan and she became the rabbi. And it's fantastic. It's wonderful to go there. It's not your way, it's not your style, but it brings Jews together. The difference in Israel is Reform Jews, conservative Jews, Orthodox Jews, Haredi Jews, all love each other. We get along. Why? Because nobody's telling us what to do.
That's in America.
In America, that's my point. The point is we have separation of shul and state. We don't have a chief rabbi, thank God. We don't have a chief rabbi. We don't have a chief rabbinate. You like a rabbi, you go to him. You don't like a rabbi, you don't go to her. The joke in America is, how do you know whether a wedding is Orthodox, conservative, reform, or Reconstructionist? You all know the joke, don't you? Yeah, okay. An Orthodox wedding, the mother of the bride is pregnant. In a conservative wedding, the bride is pregnant. In a reform wedding, the rabbi is pregnant. And in a Reconstructionist wedding, both the bride and the groom are pregnant. So, in America, we love that. I'm a post-denominational Jew. I will go to any shul that is near me. I'll feel very comfortable in a Reform shul, very comfortable in Orthodox, very comfortable in a secular humanist shul, very comfortable anywhere, because nobody's telling me what to do. There's no more religious country in the Western world than the United States of America. Why is the United States of America so religious? Because we have separation of church and state. Why is there so much tension between the secular and the religious? Because the state dominates religion, and the state shouldn't be telling people how to interact with their God. It's such a fundamental, basic tenet of human rights and civil liberties. If religion is strong, you don't need the state. Why do you need the state to tell you what to do? You should have rabbis who are influential enough to bring you in. Theodor Herzl said the rabbis should remain in their temple. So I strongly believe in separation between mosque, church, state, and secular life. I think it would be much better for religion. It helps religion when you do that. And it hurts me deeply when I see secular Jews so opposed to religious Jews in Israel, and sometimes the opposite, although it's more the secular Jews' hatred for the Orthodox because they tell them they can't, And as a secular Jew, I wouldn't dream of driving a car through an Orthodox neighborhood on Shabbat. That's just basic decency, derech eretz. You respect the other community. You don't do things like that. I wouldn't, wear shorts or anything like that. That's just basic respect. But if the state tells me I have to do it, I don't like the state so much, And look at what's going on in Europe. In Europe, nobody. If you go on a Sunday morning to Notre Dame to see the beautiful art, you could have a minyan. Everybody there is Jewish. They're all tourists from America. You don't find Catholics in church anymore in Europe because Europe has had this oppressive state involvement with religion. Everybody who is against the state is against the church.
Jewish.
Of course course the state is Jewish, and France is Catholic, and British is Episcopalian. And, first of all, Israel is not a Jewish state. It's the nation state of the Jewish people. And if you read Herzl and you read Ben-Gurion, that's a much better formulation, the nation state of the Jewish people. That brings people together. We are all part of the Jewish people. And Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. Because if you say it's Jewish, then you have to ask, what kind of Jewish? Is it Haredi Jewish? You know, my mother was the most brilliant woman, fantastic woman. For her, she knew exactly what was right in Judaism. Anything to the right of her was impossible, yucky. And, you know, anything to the left of her wasn't even Jewish. She knew exactly where it was to be Jewish, wherever she was. And that's easy and that's great if you're an individual or if you're the matriarch of a family. But if you're the state, how do you tell anybody what's Jewish? How do you tell anybody what's not? I mean, you know, we know what's not Jewish. In the law of return case, the Supreme Court made a very interesting decision. They said, we don't know quite what's Jewish, but we know if you're a Christian, you're not a Jew. That's easy. And so they ruled that way. But beyond negative definitions, who is more Jewish? You know, you folks are modern Orthodox. Haredim don't really think you're very Jewish. And, everybody thinks that somebody is not as Jewish as they are, and that's why it should not be a matter for the government. It should be a matter of individual conscience, in my view.
Are you worried? Are you worried, though, that the situation here in Israel, that's alienating the largest affiliated Jewish population or demographic in the United States, which is the Reform and Conservative movement, that they don't have equality or they don't perceive to have equality here, are we alienating them?
Forget about the Reform and Conservative. Yitz Greenberg isn't considered a rabbi in Israel. Avi Weiss isn't considered a rabbi in Israel. The rabbi who converted Ivana Trump isn't considered a rabbi in Israel. So they changed that. All right. Do I care that a bunch of guys who I don't know decided that Ivanka Trump's rabbi? I know her rabbi. He's the guy who sent me to the Soviet Union.
Rabbi Lookstein. Yes.
Rabbi Lookstein. He sent me to the Soviet Union in the 1970s to spend months and months defending Soviet Jewry. Don't tell me he's not Jewish. Don't tell me that Yitz Greenberg isn't a rabbi. Yitz Greenberg is one of the greatest Jewish leaders in history. And his wife, Blue, was one of the greatest Jewish leaders in history. And the idea that the state of Israel will pass judgment on their Jewishness is just not right.
In 1997, you wrote a book, Vanishing American Jew.
Right.
And I want to quote from the book for a second. American Jewish life is in danger of disappearing, just as most American Jews have achieved everything we ever wanted: acceptance, influence, affluence, equality. As the result of skyrocketing rates of intermarriage and assimilation, as well as the lowest birth rate of any religious or ethnic community in the U.S., the era of enormous Jewish influence in American life may soon be coming to an end.
Right.
That was 20 years ago.
That's right.
Is that the situation still today? Is it getting worse?
No,
what can be done?
Say worse or better. What I'm saying is the number of people who are today regarded as Jews has gone down as a function of the population. What we're seeing is more and more people of Jewish heritage. If you look at what's going on in Hillel and Chabad's, at universities like Harvard, you actually see an increase in membership. But many of the people who identify as Jews would not satisfy rabbinical descriptions as halakhic Jews. Birthright is very good about that. They say, you say you're a Jew, you're a Jew. You have a relative somewhere, you're a Jew. The law of return is the same thing. The law of return is not halakhic. The law of return says, if you're a mother, or your grandmother, your grandfather, it's not patrilineal. So, we have political definitions of Jews. We have academic definitions of Jews for affirmative action purposes. We have legal definitions of Jews. We have all kinds of different definitions. And there's no question that we're seeing a diminution in the number of people born to two Jewish parents who are bringing up their children as Jews. That number is going down. And therefore, the influence of Jews numerically is going to be reduced in the United States. The influence of Jews may actually increase because people who are of Jewish heritage, and America is a country of people with different heritages. Americans identify as Irish heritage, Italian heritage, Many of them don't have both parents of both heritages. Now, Judaism is different because it's a religion. But you know, as Mordecai Kaplan said, it's a religion, but it's also a culture. It's also a civilization. It's also an ethnicity. It's also a nationality. Nobody has ever given me a satisfactory definition of what Judaism or Jewishness is. It's so many different things to so many different people. We're living at a time of tremendous change. Look, my generation, everybody says, oh, your generation was fantastic. You all married Jews. Of course, nobody else would marry us. Today, everybody wants to marry a Jew, except perhaps another Jew. And the other day I was asked at the Globe Conference, what did I think of the fact that Donald Trump had a Jewish son-in-law? I said, in America, everybody has a Jewish son-in-law. The Clintons have a Jewish son-in-law. The Kennedys have a Jewish son-in-law. The Cuomos have a Jewish son-in-law. The Roosevelts have a Jewish son-in-law. The Rockefellers, they've all been to our house. They all have Jewish son-in-laws or daughters-in-law. That's, whether you like it or not, the nature of reality. And look, the Trumps were very fortunate. Their daughter-in-law converted to Judaism through a terrific rabbi. And some don't, and some do. And that's the nature of the world we live in. Our obligation is to try to bring people into Jewish life, to try to make them love Jewish life. And places like this, which encourage learning, you know, there's nothing better to bring people into Judaism than the brilliance of Jewish learning. You don't have to be an Orthodox Jew to love the Talmud. Even the Japanese study the Talmud. It's a terrific thing to study. I taught a course in Talmud with a bunch of other people at Harvard Law School. A bunch of secular professors sitting around, you know, just going over Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, and comparing and loving every minute of it. You know, you can't read the Rambam without engaging, without fighting with him, without getting involved. And so I think, you know, bringing people into Judaism through a variety of creative mechanisms is a lot better than saying, you know, don't do this, don't do that. My grandmother, Grandma Ringel's, favorite word was maturnished. And my Judaism was a lot of maturnished, with a little slap on the wrist sometimes. You know, her two favorite things are maturnished and did you make a shakel? Did you make a shakel? Shahakol niyeh, but you know, every time I touched water or drank water. So, you know, that was my Judaism. And it wasn't a Judaism of love for the affirmative. It was a Judaism very often that emphasized what you can't do rather than what Judaism gives to you. And I just think that rabbis particularly will have to meet that challenge, particularly when they're not getting supported by the state. When they're on their own, when they have to compete in the marketplace of ideas, rabbis will have to become more creative, they'll have to become more inclusive, they'll have to become more able to persuade people to come into Judaism because the state's not there to help them. And that will help religion.
You've spoken about a half-Jew. What's a half-Jew?
Well, yeah, a half-Jew. We know what a half-Jew is. If the guy won the Nobel Prize and his father was Jewish, we say, oh, he was half-Jew. But if his mother was Jewish and he got indicted for tax fraud, oh, he's only half-Jewish. So, you know, we know if we like you, we're willing to be patrilineal. If we don't like you, we insist on matrilineal, and we'll only give you the half. So, you know, that's just the way we deal with reality.
When you look at the recent U.S. elections, though, you see that Jews wielded a lot of influence. You have Chaim Saban on the left, you had Shelton Adelson on the right, you have Kushner, who's deeply involved in what's going on there. Right. So Jews are still very much influential on the political level.
Because numbers don't matter. Look at, I'm about to go from here to Great Britain, where I'm dealing with a very complicated legal case involving the best lawyers in Great Britain. We've put together an incredibly good legal team. Half the people I'm working with are Jewish in London. The best lawyers in London, many of them are Jewish. And the Jewish population of London is tiny. It makes America seem like Poland in the 1930s. So numbers are not what matters. You know, there were polls in the United States, and they asked non-Jews, what percentage of Americans are Jewish? And the typical answer was 20%. And I think the reason is an answer I once gave in one of my classes. I was teaching affirmative action, and there's a concept of affirmative action called visible minorities, minorities you can see. And so a student said to me, are Jews a visible minority? I said, no, we're an audible minority. I I got a little bit of pushback from some of my students saying it was a stereotype, but you know, we are heard, we are visible, we are in the entertainment business, we are in the legal business. We run sports in America. The bar mitzvah is the day a Jewish kid learns his chances of owning an NBA team are better than playing on one. And if you look at the National Football League, I think there were 2 Jews playing and 11 Jews owning. And so, you know, we've lived the American dream, and one of the reasons that, you know, you are a minority, the folks here from the United States who made Aliyah to Israel, and God bless you for doing it. If I had 2 lives to lead, one of them would be as an Israeli. Unfortunately, we only get to choose one place. But Americans, Jews are thriving in America. It's not like in the old days, in 1962, you're going to find this hard to believe, 1961, okay, 1961, I applied to 32 Wall Street firms. I was first in my class at Yale Law School, I was editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal, and I'd been selected to be a Supreme Court law clerk. Guess how many of the 32 firms hired me? 0. And guess how many offered me an interview? 1. And the man said that we don't hire people with C's. I had gotten all A's and 1 C in first-year contracts, and then I was so mad at the teacher I took advanced contracts and got an A. But that wasn't good enough. And then the man who didn't give me the job told me years later that he was a closet Jew hiding, and it was actually Sullivan Cromwell. And that was the way it was back then. 25 years later, my son graduated Yale Law School with similar grades to mine. He got offered by every single one of those 32 firms. But, tell you another story. So one firm did hire me. Paul, Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison. Simon Rifkin was the chairman of the Jewish Theological Seminary, one of the most active Jews in America. And he calls me in for an interview after hiring me. I have a letter, $100 a week. Calls me in for the interview, and he says, I noticed on your letter of application that you were not going to be available to work on Saturday. And I said, yeah, I was Shomer Shabbos at the time, and I said, you know, I was Shomer Shabbat, and I couldn't work on Saturday. And Simon Rifkin said, oh, I'm sorry, we can't have you. I need to have available to me somebody in litigation who's available 7 days a week. The firm down the road, not as good as ours, K. Scholler, Firman, Hayes and Handler, will hire Sabbath-observant Jews. So I went to work for them. But here's a Jewish firm that wouldn't have me. Now, of course, Paul Weiss has a minyan, they have a kosher kitchen. The firm you work for, Sullivan and Cromwell, is now called Solomon and Kronstein because the senior partner is a Orthodox Jew, and so many Jews have now made it in the legal profession. Are they all halakhic Jews? I don't know. We don't ask that question, but it's the way things are changing. And Judaism, while preserving its essential core, has to adapt to new realities.
So final question. Your name is Avi. You write about Avraham.
Right.
And you write about the first, but certainly not the last Jewish lawyer.
Right.
Right. Referring to Sodom and that whole episode, as well as others. You write in your first book. Maybe it might not be your first one, but possibly one of your most popular books, Chutzpah.
Yeah.
Right. That Jews have to fight for rights. We have to stand up for rights. And you write about Jewish responsibility to define justice in human terms, right?
Absolutely.
So when you think forward, what is the Jewish mission today?
Well, the first Jewish mission is self-preservation and self-defense. Imein ani li mili comes before, but if I am for myself alone, what am I? And so we learn the lesson of the Shoah. And the lesson of the Shoah is having morality on our side is not good enough. We understand better now the tefillah that has priorities and says, Hashem oz li amo yutein, Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. Oz comes first. Strength comes before peace. Israel, the Jewish people, can never, ever, ever have peace or be left alone unless we are qualitatively superior militarily and able to defend ourselves. So that's the first priority of every Jew in the world, certainly following the Holocaust. Self-preservation, self-defense. The Holocaust would not have occurred if Israel had existed as the nation-state of the Jewish people. And I'm so proud that Israel, the Israel I grew up with, was a wonderful agrarian society built by David Ben-Gurion, who was much like Thomas Jefferson. But it was a beggar nation. Israel could not have survived without reparations from Germany, without support from the United States, without aid from the Czechoslovakian militarily. And today, as the result of its incredible financial, economic, technological success and military success, Israel is becoming close to being a self-sufficient country. If every country in the world abandoned it, it would still have the ability to defend itself. That's one of the greatest blessings that the Jewish people ever had. If they had that blessing in the 1930s and 1940s, the world would have been a very, very different place. So that's the first priority. I think the second priority is to continue with the great Jewish tradition of tikkun olam, or a light unto the world, to help teach the world that there are values beyond just self-preservation. There are values beyond the material. Jews give more charity proportionally than almost any other group, certainly in the United States. You go today to any public building, the Metropolitan Opera, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the MoMA, every hall is named after a major Jewish contributor. We are incredibly generous as a people. We understand what it means to give back. But everybody has to define that aspect of their Jewishness independently for themselves. My generation of Jews, because we remembered the Shoah, tended to give most of our contributions to Jewish organizations. I still do, because I have a memory of the Shoah. So Carolyn and I have set up a family fund through the United Jewish Appeal, where we contribute every year to the fund, and then the fund disperses to Jewish charities all over the world. But we also contribute to the American Cancer Society, the American, various other organizations. I do not, even though I love the opera and I love music, I do not contribute to the Metropolitan Opera. I do not contribute to the New York Philharmonic. I pay for my tickets fine, but that's not my idea of philanthropy, to help very, very, very wealthy people raise the ticket prices even more and more so that they can watch even better and better operas. I think it's fine if they want to do it, but they have to pay their way. But I think that it's very important for Jews to continue to be leaders in philanthropy. And I think the other challenge, and was raised by some of you in the audience, and that is to do everything in your power to preserve Jewishness, and to preserve Judaism, and to preserve our way of life. However you define our way of life, I think we have an obligation to try to preserve it. We may disagree on what the right way of preserving it is, whether it's to, go back. I write in my book, Vanishing American Jew, people always, whenever I speak, how do we make sure our children marry Jews? I said there are two very, very simple answers. One, move to Borough Park. And don't educate your children. Just send them to a Haredi yeshiva. Don't let them go to college. They won't meet anybody. Or send them to Israel. And if they go to Israel, they're going to marry Jews. Why? Because you marry who you meet. Marriage is a function of luck and propinquity. My wife, who I love, I've been married to her, we've been together 34 years. She happened to see an ad for a speech by somebody she never heard of, named Alan Dershowitz, in 1982, and she had just broken up with somebody, and her mother said, go, go, maybe you'll meet somebody. If you don't meet somebody, you'll meet somebody who has a friend, you might meet somebody. Carolyn decided, nah, she's not going to go. She started, her mother's voice in her ear said, yeah, maybe I'll go. So she goes. I spot her in the audience in the back, and I said, wow. And as soon as the thing was over, usually people gather around the speaker. I pushed them all aside. I found Carolyn. I got her name, Carolyn Cohen, but that's all I got. And so I looked up Carolyn Cohen. There were 5 of them in the phone book in those days. They had phone books. I called the first Carolyn Cohen. I said, you want to go out with me? She said, sure, but you have to bring me back to the nursing home at 9 o'clock. I called the second Carolyn Cohen. You want to go out with me? She said, sure, but can I bring my husband? I was not into that. So I got her on the 3rd try. Total, complete propinquity and luck. We were in the same city. She was studying for a PhD. I was a young professor at Harvard. We were in the same place. If I had gone to Yale instead of Harvard, I would never have met her. If she had gone to Brown instead of Boston University for a PhD, we never would have met. So propinquity is such an important part, particularly of young marriages. And in my day, you only met Jews. If you went to work for a law firm, it would be other Jews. Today, most Jewish parents want to send their kids to Princeton and Yale and Northwestern and Harvard and Stanford, and inevitably you're going to meet people of different backgrounds. You're going to go to work for law firms, you're going to meet people of different backgrounds. Not in Israel. You're not better than we are in this respect. You're just less diverse than we are. And so in America, we're going to see, by the way, the statistics are that Israelis who come to America have a slightly higher rate of intermarriage than Americans in America. So it's not that you're any better than we are, you just have fewer options when you're here in Israel. And so, we're going to have to continue. This is a struggle. Judaism, Zionism are not guarantees. They are opportunities. Zionism is a great opportunity to create a nation state for the Jewish people for the first time in 2,000 years. And I have to tell you, you Israelis have done a phenomenal, phenomenal job with all the criticism, with all the backbiting, with all the hatred that you have internally within the, I'm talking only within the cabinet now. You've still created an incredible nation state. Strong, powerful, economic, high-tech. When I debate about BDS and students say we should boycott Israel, I just take out my iPhone and say, oh yeah? Well, throw this away first. And then I give them all the other things that they would have to throw away. The best answer to BDS, of course, is developing technology that the world can't do without. And then BDS will fall by the wayside. So continuing doing what you're doing, strengthen your military, strengthen your economic system, strengthen Jewish religion, strengthen your willingness to go to Africa and Asia to help people when tsunamis hit or when we met a woman. Danny introduced me to the woman the other day. I was just blown away. This is a woman who pretends, she's a Jewish woman from Israel, and she pretends she's a Christian from a different country in order to bring Israelis into the belly of the beast in Aleppo, Syria, to give medical care, to give other kinds of care to people, and to help them all over the world. And she doesn't want to do it openly because she goes into countries that don't recognize Israel or that Israel is their enemies, because she wants to help people. She just wants to help human beings. That's part of Israel's spirit too. So keep doing what you're doing, and may you go from strength to strength. Thank you.
Professor Dershowitz, thank you very much.
What's that one more second, please, before we leave? Unfortunately, tonight, the program did not allow us to have any time for Q&A. But there is one thing which I'm throwing out as a challenge, as I always like to say. The good thing, I'm the tachlis guy with Alan. What I'd like you to do, if you have questions for Alan, I'm sure many of you do, something that many of you may not know, some do know, about a year ago, with Alan's inspiration, he started a new TV station which we called ILTV. Sounds high-techy, ILTV.tv. And the idea is to have a great news channel with 3 times a day they have the news from Israel with a very, very smart, attractive, cool, young anchor woman. And then we have different programs through the week, and the best program on it is a program we call One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. So if you can't remember anything, just go ILTV.tv, that's kind of easy to remember, or just do One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz like in basketball. And it's a thing where you take, since nobody reads anymore, what we ask people to do is just take your cell phone, everybody has a cell phone, okay, prop it up in front of your computer or whatever, type out a question if you want, and read a 30-second question. All of you can do that. Then you send it in, there's easy directions to it. If you can't follow the directions, just WhatsApp it to me and I'll take care of it. Okay, and then you'll ask a 30-second question, Alan will answer, it'll go on the program. You can take that 3-minute bit and put it on Facebook, Instagram, send it to all your friends. Oh, this is me asking Alan Dershowitz a question, him answering me. So please do that, and now you have something to take home with you and bring it back to us. Laila tov, toda rabah, timatan, thank you.